To start this project, I decided to cut it out of all one piece of foam. Basically get it all drawn on one piece of foam to begin, to make sure that everything was going to line up properly with my dungeon tile system, which are 3x3-inch squares. This would kind of change later on because my middle measurement of kind of between these two archways was not wide enough. It should have been about an inch wider, but using just a random high-tech tool to draw my archways on there, I pressed it into the foam and then cut it on my Proxon. I then began to draw out the lines and make the cuts necessary to kind of get the overall profile of the bridge. As you can see, I just kind of hand drew the ramp part of the bridge, and then I used the Alpha knife just to kind of trim it to profile, and then use this as a stencil for the other side. Next was to actually start drawing the lines where the cuts would be made and to kind of start piecing this thing apart, because it is going to be a modular bridge. And as you can see here, it has a double arch or a single archway. And this again would change later on because my measurements were not super great at the beginning as they should have been. So then I split those in half, and then I had my two walls, and everything else would be built in between this. It was then time to start adding magnets, and to do this I used the borer tool that I had found on Amazon. This is a phenomenal tool. It's a really easy way to cut round holes in foam at basically any depth that you want. So I found the right size and then started cutting the holes in and then tweezing them out. The next step was to mark all the polarities on my magnets, and I like to stick them on my metal ruler here and then just kind of pull them off and then start gluing them in. You got to make sure you get a good glue in, or they might just pull out of the holes. That's so satisfying. Anyway, the next step was to actually check the polarities, and I did this by setting them up next to each other and making sure they just repelled each other, essentially. To construct the archways, I used white foam core with the paper peeled off, and I used this paint bottle to kind of train the archway on the foam. This is a great way to do it to prevent any kind of cracking. I then put two pieces together and hot glued a bead, making sure not to get any on the seam between them, and then just pressed and held this in place and then trimmed off the rest. I did this on both sides before I actually ended up cutting them in half through the foam core. This was an easy way to kind of make sure that they lined up and would look really good. Once I had my two halves, the next step was to actually start to build the walkway. Again, I just used a layer of foam core here and just glued it on. And there it is. I ended up making these 1-inch pieces in between, again, because my measurements at the beginning weren't exactly perfect. So these helped me create larger archways and also kind of gave it a little bit more variety. I then decided to use actually some DOS sculpting clay here to texture the stone pathway that would go on top of the bridge. I used a roller with the stone texture that I 3D printed at home, and then just cut these and made sure I had the right depth, or right thickness rather, to set them in, and then just glued it on and let it dry. This is something that I felt like I actually took a lot of time on to make sure that they had really kind of seamless seams, but turns out I goofed on at least one of them. I don't know why, but this is something you really want to kind of pay attention to. To texture them, I use the tool that I learned from John over at Tabletop Witchcraft and just gave them a nice little kind of dimpled texture. And this is what you're left with once they all dry up. You'll see here that some of the seams actually have some pretty big gaps. Again, that's kind of my fault, but I thought I did better job on that, but apparently not. I then started to make several cuts and create magnetic parapets for the bridge. This was something I wanted to do to make sure that I didn't just have one singular kind of bridge. So I made these ones to look like stone and just kind of carved them out, kind of like I've done some other kind of stone columns before, glued them together, again added magnets, and made them kind of removable. And I really like the way they ended up looking, but this wasn't the only kind of parapet slash railing that I was going to make, but more on that later. Next was to add some stone. So I did a few testings here, and I decided just to do it by hand with pen, and then textured it again with the Tabletop Witchcraft tool. One thing I like to do on these is to kind of take my clay sculpting tool here, or really anything with a flat edge, and then just push in a bunch of random stones just to give it a little bit more depth and texture. Sometimes it requires you to go back and trace around it with the ballpoint pen to kind of cut into the foam a bit more, but this actually gives a really nice look, and I guess I decided I wasn't done with the textures, so I decided to roll tinfoil on them as well to give them a more rough look. The parapet, on the other hand, was more of like carved stone or molded stone, if you will, so it got the treatment with the kind of more dimpled look, and then I added some cracks manually to each of those. Next, I started to layer on some more stones and things like that, so I cut some of these half circles to kind of bring out some more stonework around the archway, textured them with tinfoil, and you'll see that later. But I wanted to show you a trick here with creating wood texture. You take a wire brush and you just kind of drag it across, you get a nice look like that. But if you place your two fingers on, or just one finger or whatever, and then use them as like a way to mask the brush from hitting, you'll see that you get like these curves in the actual wood. If you flip it around and then put your fingers kind of partially into those same curves and then drag across again, you actually create some really cool looking knots in your wood texture, as you can see here. All those wood planks would actually go on the underside of the bridge, just to make it look more complete. I then drew some lines to create separate stones in the archway stonework, and textured those as well. I then built some pillars, and these pillars actually will match the depth of my dungeon tiles, just so I can create bridges over deeper depths if I want. After that, it was time to make this even more modular. I didn't just keep it modular at like the width of the bridge and the number of archways. I actually wanted to make sure that I could have different variety for different situations. So I decided to make a wood railing for it as well. Having two different kind of parapets for this bridge really kind of lends itself to be used in different situations. Whether your game takes place in a large city or a kingdom, or maybe within a castle walls and there's a bridge, it's probably going to have nice stone parapets. But if it's just in the countryside, maybe it'll just have some nice painted wood ones. One thing to note on this is that using this balsa wood and super gluing, they can be pretty brittle when you handle them, so something you want to do with care. Since these railings had spindles and everything like that, I had to draw an extra texture to fill in the now exposed foam, but it turned out really nice. After I got all the foam primed with a black acrylic paint and Mod Podge mixture, I painted everything with this pewter gray from Apple Barrel. I then got my other base coat of brown on all the wood bits, and then I began to dry brush. For the wood, I actually just mixed the brown base color with a little bit of like yellow ochre color and did a dry brushing on that just to warm it up a little bit before I actually ended up giving another dry brush by adding parchment or a light tan to the mixture. Not cleaning my brush in between at all either, just added it right straight on the brush and then dry brushed that to bring out that wood grain. I then took a variety of different colors and went and painted hand-selected stones. I used some more kind of earthy colors, some light greens and some really dark greens, and then some kind of brownish kind of yellow on the side stone of the bridge. And then I ended up getting a little bit lighter color on the walkway part. And the reason I did this was to kind of create the effect that it was just a different type of stone that was used there, maybe river stones as opposed to just rocks from the fields. So I did this with some light yellows, really light gray, and then I made a really cool mixture of kind of a gray blue and added that in there. Next it was time to add the dry brushing, and I took the parchment color from Folk Art and I did a heavy dry brushing on the walkway of the bridge. And I paid extra attention to get it a bit more heavy toward the middle to make it look like there was a bit more traffic in that area of the walkway. The side stone ended up getting a little bit lighter of a dry brushing just to kind of highlight the edges, nothing too crazy compared to the walkway in the middle. And then I lined them all up, built the whole bridge to make sure that my kind of more worn path in the middle all kind of matched really well, and there wasn't, one part that looked a lot thinner than the other. I like to take my projects and put them together once I've got kind of like a general overall finished paint done to see if there's anything I want to add on later. So I added on all the stone parapets just to see how they looked. Didn't want it to look incredibly bland, and I was actually really happy with the way they turned out. I then ended up painting the kind of wood parapet, the railing, in like a kind of a barn red mixture that I had made, and then I dry brushed it with you guessed it, parchment. This is the best dry brushing color on the planet. I then did a black-brown mix wash, just the wash I always use, over everything. The only place I didn't put it was on that kind of middle part of the pathway where it was extra light. I did get the edges of it washed, but not the middle. And just like that, everything was done, and here they are. As you can see, here's the stone parapet one, and the wood parapet one turned out really nice as well, I think. And here it is between elevated terrain and another option. As you can see, you got a wider arch and a thinner arch right there. Here's an extra wide arch, and it's on pillars. These pillars are actually the same height as an individual dungeon tile, so that way I could actually stack them more accurately. Worth noting that the bridge by itself is about 2 tiles high. In this example, it kind of shows the highest you could actually make the bridge with the big wood pillars in between. I really like this because you can actually have encounters take place underneath the bridge, which is a heck of a lot of fun. Here it is being assembled just piece by piece to its full length. And here it is at just a single dungeon tile height, and here it is at its max, which is really cool. I seriously love the fact that I can do this with it. Now this is actually a really awesome project, and it really gives another element to your terrain pieces for your encounters. My last video was actually the rope bridge kind of version of this, which I thought was really fun. I had a lot of fun using that in some encounters that I ran in our group. I'm really excited to use this one. I think that it's going to have a lot of versatility, and if you look at these photos, you can see that you can set up some really great encounters for your campaigns. I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, please leave a like, comment below anything that you think that could be added to this. I have a bunch of ideas to where like you could actually make maybe some broken pieces on the end, so you could have a broken bridge, like a big gap, a big chasm that the party has to figure out how to get through. But leave a comment down below of some ideas that you have. Also, consider subscribing if you found value in this video. Turn on notifications, it really helps me out. There's also going to be some links below to some of the products that I use in my builds. And thank you so much again. I'm overwhelmed by the positive feedback that I've had since I've started this channel. Thanks and take care.